I nearly gave up on container gardening entirely. Back when I was 63, every pot I planted either dried out in a week or drowned in a rainstorm, and I figured my hands just weren't steady enough for it anymore. Turns out it had nothing to do with my hands. I was making the same 5 mistakes almost everybody makes when they start, and every single fix turned out to be easier on my body than what I'd been doing, not harder. Here's exactly what I was getting wrong, and what actually works. Mistake 1. I bought pots that were too small. I thought smaller meant lighter, easier to manage, easier to move. What actually happened is small pots dry out within a day in summer heat, which meant more watering trips, not fewer. Bigger pots hold more soil, which holds more moisture, which means longer stretches between waterings. I've never once regretted buying a pot too large. I have regretted every single pot I bought too small. Now when I'm choosing a container, I go one size up from what feels right, and I set it on a wheeled plant caddy from day one, before it's full of heavy wet soil, so moving it later never becomes a two-person job. Mistake 2. The drainage in nursery pots is almost never enough on its own. Every glazed or oversized pot I bought had one small hole in the bottom, nowhere near enough for a container that large. Standing water around the roots is what actually kills most container plants, not underwatering, which is the opposite of what most people assume. The fix is simple. Before I plant anything in a large pot, I drill 3 or 4 extra holes around the base with a masonry bit if it's ceramic, or a regular bit if it's plastic or resin. Takes 5 minutes, and I do it sitting down at my potting bench, never crouched over the pot itself. Mistake 3, and this one solves the budget question I know some of you are already thinking. Good potting soil isn't enough on its own either, but you don't need to buy anything fancy to fix that. I mix in whatever's cheapest and closest at hand. A handful of aged compost from my own bin, a scoop of the sandiest soil from a corner of my yard where nothing else grows well. That sandy soil that seems useless everywhere else is actually excellent for improving drainage in a container. I've never paid a dime extra for a soil amendment. I just use what's already sitting around my property that I'd otherwise ignore. But none of this matters if you're still filling every pot from a garden hose, bent over at ground level, one at a time, every single evening. More on how I fixed that in just a minute. Quick one before I keep going. How many pots are currently sitting in your yard right now? Drop the number below. I read every comment. Mistake 4 was watering itself, or more specifically, how much work I made it. I used to walk a hose from pot to pot, kneeling at each one to check the soil. Now every large container sits on a plant stand at hip height, and for the ones in spots I can't easily reach with a hose, I use water-storing crystals mixed right into the soil, a tablespoon per gallon of soil, no more, worked in before I plant. Those crystals absorb dozens of times their weight in water and release it slowly to the roots over days, instead of hours. For a pot sitting on a stone patio where running a drip line isn't practical, that's been the single biggest relief on my back all summer. Quick one. If you've made it this far with me, drop the word pots below. It genuinely helps this video find more folks like us. Mistake 5. And this is the one that surprised me most. I used to scatter my containers all over the yard, one here, one there, because I thought that spread the color around nicely. What that actually meant was walking the entire property every single day just to check on things. Now I group 3 or 4 pots together in one spot, right along the path between my back door and my raised beds, at the same hip height as everything else. One stop covers 4 plants instead of 4 separate trips across the yard. It looks better too, if I'm honest, but the real win is the steps I'm not taking anymore. One more thing worth mentioning if you're working with a tall pot but a shallow-rooted plant. You don't need to fill the whole thing with soil. I set an empty, upside-down nursery pot in the bottom third of anything over 2 feet tall before adding soil on top. It saves soil, saves money, and makes the whole container noticeably lighter to move, since you're not lifting 18 inches of packed dirt you never needed in the first place. I put the exact drill bit sizes, the soil mix ratio, and the crystal to soil ratio into a free checklist. Links right below if you want the shortcut, instead of losing plants to trial and error like I did. Here's what I'd tell anyone starting out with containers. None of these 5 fixes cost real money, and none of them require more strength than what you're already using to garden the wrong way. Bigger pots on wheels instead of small ones you're constantly refilling. A few extra drain holes instead of root rot. Free soil from your own yard instead of a bag you don't need. Crystals and hip-height stands instead of a hose and a bent back. Pots grouped together instead of scattered across the whole property. If you want the full checklist, it's free, link right below. Next week, I'm showing you the bucket system I use that means I only water my containers once every 10 days instead of every single evening. If you've been wondering how that's even possible, that one's for you. This is real gardening, for real bodies, from someone who isn't planning on stopping.